Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on how can your DevOps teams meet rising user expectations. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Splunk. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the LeadDev Slack to answer some of your questions in the Effective Teams channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Sarah Wells, and today I'll be joined by Molly, Rin, Kishore, and Arthur to share their experiences and insights. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourself, and I'm just going to go around the order that you're on my Zoom. So Rin, could you start?
Yeah, hi, my name is Rin Daniels. I'm an infrastructure engineer at Explosion, which makes Spacey and Prodigy their developer tools for machine learning and natural language processing. I'm right now the entire infrastructure / DevOps team here, small shop. So I do basically anything that involves arguing with computers in the cloud, as I like to say. So that's me.
Great. Molly.
Hey everyone, my name is Molly Struby. I am an SRE at Netflix on the core team. So core stands for Critical Operations and Reliability Engineering. And we're a centralized SRE team. So we don't embed SREs on engineering teams. We just have one central team. And we actually hold the pager for Netflix. So if Netflix is down, our team's the one that's getting paged, and we're responsible for getting it back up and fixing it. And then in addition to holding the pager, we also are responsible for driving good reliability practices across basically all of Netflix engineering.
Excellent, thank you. Arthur.
Hi, my name is Arthur Eamon. I'm currently based in Paris. I'm in the Splunk DEM team, that stands for Digital Experience Monitoring. Before that, I was in China for a few years, and I started my career in the IT, where I figured out that very quickly that it's not just about technology, it's also about the people and how you run the project if you want to make progress.
Excellent. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Kishore.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kishore Jalera. Previously, I've led global SRE teams at Microsoft using Yahoo and IMBU. And then I was kind of lost in my career, like not knowing what to do. So I took a long sort of epic break. I wrote a lot of code, and I'm getting ready to offer something in the incident management space. So that's what I am trying to do.
Great, thank you. So when I first picked up the Accelerate book by Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble and Jean Kim, it struck me that it directly links being successful as a software development organization with having a positive impact on the business. So that's in terms of profitability, market share, and productivity. So when I saw the subject of this webinar, I thought it's really interesting. So how do we build our organizations and our culture so that everyone is focused on the customers and the business impact? I don't think it's enough to build things right. So to put in things like reliability and observability, we've also got to build the right things. So I think that focus on user experience is just really interesting. So I want to ask some questions about that. And I wanted to start by asking the same question to everyone, which is really about how close you are to your customers in your role and how much direct impact do you and your teams have on user experience? And can I start with Molly?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky in the sense that I am very close to the customers. So our team, as I mentioned earlier, we hold the pager for Netflix. So if customers can't stream, we're the ones getting paged, and our top priority is not to understand what's broken, not to, root cause, whatever. Our priority is to get customers back to streaming. And so it's having, being on those front lines is really useful in helping understand, how the product interacts with its users and really like what it means for folks. And so I feel really lucky to be able to kind of have that sort of impact. I'll also mention, that's at Netflix, at a big company. At previous companies, so I've been at small startups before. And one thing I found extremely valuable that I was able to do was we took customer service rotations. So obviously you're so small, you don't have a customer service team. So the engineers would be the customer service for a week. And I thought that was one of the most enlightening experiences in my entire career, because it really introduced you to how a customer uses your product, and it makes you get out of that engineering mindset and into that customer mindset. So I think those are super important when you're trying to build a reliable system, is remembering that why. Why do you want it to be reliable? What does that mean for your customers?
I think it's a great idea, getting people to actually talk directly to their customers and try and solve their problems. Arthur.
Yes, starting by the why, that's exactly what I like to do. So in my previous project, usually it was all about technology. Actually, we should start by the why. So usually we have, when I've been working on project, there was 3 aspects that I was focusing on. The first was the why, the equation. When we prepared this meeting together, we were mentioning e-commerce example, or maybe Netflix, because there's a subscription. And then you told me, Sarah, that you work in the media, online media, and it's not like you're going to lose some immediate sales. So what is the equation? That's the first step. And in the media, it's the number, the quality, the user experience is going to drive the session lengths. And the longer the session of the users, the longer you keep them online, the more ads and contents you're going to serve, and hence this is revenue. So cracking the equation, aside from the technology, was usually the first aspect that we were discussing with the users, saying it's not just technology, it's not just code, it's this equation. And then from this, you get to the KPIs, you get to what do you want to measure? Because if there's one thing that is common to everybody around the world, whether you're in Paris, London, in the US, we are all impatient. But how do you measure speed? How do you measure performance? As we used to say, slow is the new down. So how do you measure slowness? And from KPIs, then you go to the tools, and the tooling, well, there's so many different tools. You want to start with the easy ones. So that's why we usually start with the front-end stuff to get the user experience. And from this, we dig into the diagnosis and further in detail. So that's how I interact with the devs and with the users and teams.
Rin.
Yeah, so in my current role, like I said, I'm at a quite small company. I think we have around 25 people in engineering, most of whom are machine learning engineers. So while I am not a machine learning linguistics person, and I'm not directly working with customers in that regard, because, small team, everyone wears a lot of hats sometimes, I think have a lot of impact in making sure that I'm supporting the other engineers, the developers, in making sure that they can work as effectively as possible. So finding out, roadblocks that are getting in their way, making it easier for them to, spin up GPU machines to run particular experiments on, that's going to, directly impact the customer. So I'm just like lurking behind the scenes, wizard behind the curtain, that sort of thing. But I've also worked at, larger organizations. I worked at HashiCorp on the Terraform Cloud team. I worked at Etsy back in the day. And I always liked being in those sort of supportive roles where even, whether or not you have the pager, and I spent a lot of years, being one of the people on the pager rotation, you still, it's just finding ways to maximize the impact and to keep in mind, what are we really trying to do here? Like, we're not running infrastructure in the cloud because it's so fun and like this is just a neat hobby that we do. Like, ultimately, we're trying to solve a particular problem for our users, for our customers. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, kind of no matter where you are in the organization.
And just to round off this question, Kishore.
Sure. I don't have customers yet, but again, given I'm at that stage in that journey, I'm kind of my own customer. But I've dealt with at Yahoo we had 1 billion users, and I was running most of the media properties, Yahoo.com, finance, board. So that was like more like consumer facing, first line of defense. It was called production engineering back there, but similar to SRE, but not quite. We had some embedded teams and also some first line of defense sort of a team. So again, your usual stuff, status, emails, customers, given there's so many of them, we didn't get to interact directly a whole lot. But that was slightly different at Microsoft because we were supporting enterprise. So both external customers like Shell and Walmart and Geico, and also internal, which was Windows and Office. And so each of these teams were using our product to build their code, developer services or Azure DevOps, if you remember, if you're using any of the product. Again, the same thing, writing postmortems in terms of communicating, engaging with the customers. Big outages, they wanted us to make sure that we close the loop. So again, getting in touch with them. Also, some teams directly work with, there's some legacy on-prem product we were supporting. So you work with those customers and they keep pushing, we still want to be on legacy, and because they don't want to change, like, why would Office want to change or move to Azure DevOps, which is based in the cloud? So that's pretty much like the extent of the customer interaction.
Well, it's great hearing how all of you have got that customer experience really central to how you work with other people to develop stuff. Kishore, you've written about how DevOps is more, you think DevOps is more about customer feedback and quick learning than about culture or process or tools. So what do you think teams need to do to really develop that customer focus?
It's a great question. But no, yeah, I did write about it a long time ago. Like I said, Sarah, the writing's a bit rough, but I'll try to sort of polish it a little bit better here. But I think a quick recap before I answer your question is like, what exactly is DevOps, right? So if you remember 2005, 2007, the Etsy people and IMVU people, which I worked at for 7 years, and continuous deployment, Eric Ries and Lean Startup and all that, right? I think fundamentally it was about breaking those silos between operations and developers, right? Fundamentally, so that you're removing those barriers. And I feel as an industry we have come a long way in terms of removing those barriers. I think sort of DevOps, when I say it's more about customer feedback, I think we've overcome that hurdle where DevOps is mostly stable stakes. Not necessarily for everyone. Just as an example, when I was at Yahoo, there was somebody on the finance team called Bob. Again, it's a made-up name, essentially, Yahoo Finance. If you have your iPhone, right, your stocks app is powered by Yahoo Finance. So we used to buy stuff from Nasdaq and just essentially like show the data to you on your phone. And this person wanted to build something like using a machine learning model. This was like 7-8 years ago. A custom stock recommender engine. The problem was too many barriers, right? Getting compute takes 2 months. We were not in the public cloud yet. I was pushing really hard for that, but paranoid, which security is, getting all the approvals takes long. So I think once you overcome those barriers, and that's the point I'm trying to make is, once you overcome those barriers, I think, cultural, technical, and process barriers, you sort of become this DevOps team where engineers can actually innovate for the customer. So DevOps started off like that, I think 2005, barriers, and I think now it's mostly table stakes. If you're behind, then please, go fix something. If you find people like Bob who want to do something, then, or Mary, let them, enable them to sort of be those intrapreneurs, right? And in terms of what do teams need to do to develop a customer focus, then, so once you solve that problem, then I think, we talked a lot about the customer, right? So I think you start off with a mindset, which is be your own customer first. Like, I think probably Molly has, the easiest job here because they watch Netflix a lot. I watch Netflix a lot, right? So that's not the case for everyone. So that, I think that customer obsession, I would say, I think product obsession should come first, and then with that comes customer obsession. I think, and once you get that customer obsession, you'll then go and figure out like what is it that you need to be doing to provide that amazing customer experience, right? So, for example, we lost out on a contract to Apple. Yahoo also used to power the weather app, but then we had a lot of reliability issues, and Apple said, whatever, and we lost it to the weather channel, and we didn't want the same thing to happen to Yahoo Finance, and so we sat down with product, and exactly, I think somebody already mentioned this, like define what customer experience means. So for example, if you want to add a stock and it's spinning, right? Your app is spinning, like, are you capturing that, right? And how does that impact your uptime? How does that impact your numbers, right? And you should be doing that. So that's like the last step, right? So remove the barriers, develop a passion for the product and the customers, and then go figure. And then you'll do it. Once you develop a passion for the product, you'll have that empathy. You don't want your customers to be suffering. So I think that's like the last step where, and I think one of the reasons I'm kind of doing this, this webinar is because that's like the next phase in our journey. Is like the next wave of successful companies will be, the ones who are obsessed with the product and the customer, and then they'll work with, the metrics and things like that to ensure that the customers are getting what they, and I've seen it, like really small DevOps team. There's a HTTP 422 at 2 a.m. Because some underage customer registered for the daily fantasy on Yahoo Sports, and they wake up, they want to solve the problem, and it's just one error, right? So I think that should be the next wave of successful companies, in my opinion.
I think it's a great point. I think it's a great point that when it used to take forever to set everything up, you just couldn't, you had to sort that out before you could start to just deliver value and to even get quick feedback. I was thinking about, I worked at the Financial Times for a decade. Our first hack day, everything was kind of fake because you wouldn't be able to buy a server. But by the time that I left, people would actually deploy their hack day applications into the estate, and they'd give it a URL, and it would just look exactly like any other part of what existed. So now it's is what you're building something people would like to use. So I think that you can have that customer focus as a developer, and you couldn't 10 years ago because you were so far removed from it.
Absolutely. Like, in fact, I say, you ship something today as a developer, and it goes to production in 2 months or 1 month. Like, what's even the point, right? You have no idea like how that change that you made actually impacted anything. So I think that should, even before you start innovating, like remove the barriers, right? If you're if you're an SRE team babysitting systems and having a lot of toil and not adding value, and you're merely acting as a hub, then might as well hand over the pager and then focus on what I call platform competence, right? There's a fiber cut in the East Coast. Can you actually know that there was a fiber cut for 2 seconds, but then you had a 6-hour outage because of that, because of cascading application failures, right? So I think we need to be sort of moving towards that model where teams are focusing on their core competencies and letting people sort of innovate.
Anyone else like to comment on how you can help teams develop a customer focus?
Oh, I love that idea of kind of being your customer first. I think that's great. I know for us at Netflix, we've got that pie in the sky dream of, one day we'd love to have like SLOs and SLIs for every service team, and we can show them exactly how that connects to the end user. We're very far from there. But in the meantime, a couple of things that I have seen work well in terms of reminding development teams like why they're developing. Like I said, we don't embed SREs, so it's our goal to really kind of impart that reliability wisdom. And I think one great way is to really center around like a motto or end goal. So at Netflix, our goal is to entertain the world. And I think the more that you focus on that, the more you bring that conversation back to that end goal, that can just be helpful for engineers making that connection. Okay, I'm building this super robust system or this new feature. Why? To entertain the world. So it needs to work. It needs to work well. Otherwise, we're not going to achieve that goal. The second thing that I've seen be really useful, and we did this recently. So every quarter we do kind of a quarterly review. What were our 9s for the past quarter? What were our wins? What are our risks? And we do presentations. In this last quarter, we brought in our consumer insights group, and they presented on all of their research and data they had for how outages impact customers. And it was fascinating how the same outage can impact different demographics at extremely different levels. Some of them will remember it. Some of them they say, oh, okay, not a big deal. I'll try again in 5 minutes. But maybe you have a parent who needs that Netflix to keep their kid busy because they have something else they have to do. Those outages are super impactful. So bringing them in and having them present to the engineers, we got a lot of good feedback that it was eye-opening. So I think that's another great way, especially if you have a large org, talk to your customer success service people, whoever's doing your kind of customer insights, and maybe have them present to your engineers as a good reminder of what, why we're building these products. So those are kind of two things that I guess are a little bit easier to accomplish to kind of help instill that mindset.
Because you were saying to me when we were preparing for this that actually your team are the ones that see the overall impact, but individual development teams, they're building part of the streaming service. So it's that, how do you link it all together so that they understand the impact of what they're doing on everything else?
Exactly. And you want them to understand that impact, not just when stuff's broken, not when you have to page them in. You want them to understand that impact and think about it as they're building. So they're kind of making those good choices along the way.
I also liked what you said earlier, Molly, about doing customer service or customer support rotations. I've seen those at a lot of places I worked, and I think it's so valuable because even if you are in a place where you can kind of eat your own dog food, like when I was working at Hashi, we ran Terraform on the Terraform team, so we were using the product every day. But even doing that, you're not going to get every single possible thing that customers are going to do, and customers are going to do weird things. And it's only when you're kind of in the weeds doing that kind of first line support that you're going to get a good sense for how people are actually using the product day to day. They're going to come up with use cases that you never expected. And sometimes, you'll uncover problems that you didn't even know you had. So I think those sorts of rotations are really important for getting that kind of user focus.
Oh, how difficult is that to do when you're in a big organization like Netflix? I mean, I know I've heard of various things like Deliveroo getting people to actually go out on the bike and experience it, but I think it must be hard to organize.
I think large scale, yes. I know our team, we've been invited to just do ride-alongs with customer success folks. And so I think it's something that for one-off engineers who want the experience, people are more than happy to provide it. I'm not sure what it would take to kind of organize that at a large scale. You'd probably have to figure out some way to do it. Like, I don't know, maybe you have one CS person, like 7 people are kind of sitting on their shoulders somehow. But Rin, I 100% agree. It's super, super valuable because customers use stuff in ways that you would never have dreamed of.
In larger orgs,
just to add.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I've seen or heard of it done as kind of a rotation similar to an on-call rotation where, sometimes it is the on-call person. I've seen that done at places with a less of an on-call burden. It depends on how noisy your week with the pager is. But, that person will just go, full-time be a member of the CS team for that week. So that's one way I've seen it done, of kind of sharing the load and making sure that those people kind of get like the actual support experience. I've also seen it done as kind of an escalation where engineers will, kind of step in to help out with the kind of trickier problems that, the support team might need a little more engineering expertise with. So there's options there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with Sarah that it's really hard to do a change like this at scale at large companies. But again, there's the carrot model, there's the stick model. But again, really, if you can create the right incentive for people, I've seen these initiatives fail. I've seen these initiatives be successful. But I think it's really about creating the right incentives. For example, a quick example at Zynga, I created something called a clean room, which was based on alert budgets. So if you're a dev team, and if you go over a certain number of alerts or incidents, based on some time period, we will just hand you back the pager, right? What are we going to do, right? There's only so much. So there's ways to do this, but I think fundamentally we all agree that clearly that you have to experience your product experience the pain, develop the empathy. I think that's a good starting point. How you do it, I don't know. Again, it's easier probably for Molly, harder for some other people. But again, even with Netflix, you just had, like somebody said, you have to, it could be a show, it could be the time of the day, it could be, what else is going on in your life, right? So I think gathering all that data and truly understanding that customer experience is key.
Arthur, do you do anything like that at Splunk to really get a sense of what your customers' problems are?
Yeah, so I have in mind an example, because we say customer centric. So usually the next question is test, test, test. And we all know that dev, they don't like to test, like to dev, don't like to test. Happens, well, in most organizations. And okay, so I have this client, that's this team, it's a cosmetic company present in 150 countries almost, big one. So there is always this discussion between the global team, local team. So finally, they agreed that the global team will generate some content, do some dev, but always run this before by the local team. So local team would say, okay, we approve this dev, that's okay, that's fine, okay. That goes back to the US in this case, and the launch in production, and it doesn't work. Doesn't work for China. China, that at that time was a very huge, biggest market in the cosmetic, you can imagine. And we go back to the US team from China. I was based at that time in Shanghai, and I was together with the local team. And they say, we're not stupid. We have tested everything. We have put a CDN in place so we can serve better in China. We have tested the content. We made sure that we don't have any Facebook link in the page because we know it's filtered. Well, we have done all the checklists. We have tested with the folks with our client UX group in New York, and it works. It's been tested. So you cannot say it's not working for China. Well, we had forgotten one thing, is that we had some A/B testing that was in the page, and this A/B testing solution was not hosted in China. And this company had lost their license for China. And well, that's stupid, but no one is responsible for the license of this third-party solution. So that's the kind of example that we had. Not only test, not only get customer feedback, but test locally in the same context as the user. So it's not just about testing, it's about agreeing on what is the right way to test. This is where we start to have some stuff and solution to have robots and synthetic testing being done, not only locally, but also from the internet, from China, and from every country where we were targeting, where we had websites to develop.
I've certainly found there are so many things that you actually only discover when you've got something happening in production. And if you can pick that up quickly, then you are in a reasonable position. I want to go back a little bit to Rin. You were talking about how you've worked at companies of very sort of different size, and also you've been several steps removed from the customer because you've been building things for people who are then building things. I want to sort of get your ideas of how you make sure that DevOps concerns are prioritized in that kind of situation, and how you can connect people working a couple of steps removed to the customer.
Yeah. I think in some ways it's easier at smaller orgs to have people see the value of what I do, because at a 25, 30 person company, I can kind of have direct relationships with every other person, and I can talk to them about what problems they're dealing with. Whereas at a much bigger organization, it's a lot easier for ops to kind of become a cost center. Like I've worked at bigger orgs where our quarterly goal setting meetings was everything, and accomplishments. It was all about like, here's these customer facing features that we shipped, devs, yay devs. And then like 30 seconds at the end, it was like, and now the ops team, keep doing what you're doing. Good job not taking the site down. And we were just like, cool, but are there ways that we can be more impactful? And so I think there's a lot that you can do at those scales of kind of fostering those relationships yourselves. So I've seen people do kind of a more casual social thing, like the Donut Slack plugin, where you just meet up with a random engineer on another team. Different models of like embedding. when I was at Etsy and we worked in an office, the security team had candy to lure people to come over to their desks and, talk to them about security questions or just to get candy. But it was a way of, fostering relationships from a team that, is normally seen as, one of those scary teams that always says no, and you can't do that. So yeah, I think it's about finding ways to connect with the other teams that you work with or the people that you work with, whether that be customers directly or other engineering teams.
When I worked at the Financial Times, one of the things we did was we got developers coming from product teams to come and work with the DevOps and infra teams on a secondment basis. So we had people coming in for a couple of months at a time, and it was great because we got their skills and we worked with them, but also they were our best advocates. They'd go back to whatever team they worked with and they would remember all the stuff that we'd built, and they knew who we were, and they weren't scared of coming and talking to us because they'd been sat with us for 3 months. I think that the personal interactions are really important in building that trust, I think.
Yeah, when I was at Etsy, I think I remember, this was many years ago, when I was onboarding, I did a few different rotations where for the first 6 weeks that I worked there, I went and I sat with 6 different teams for a week each to get to know not random teams, kind of the 6 teams that the infra ops team worked the most closely with. And so that was a really great way of finding out, here's the people who you are going to be working with kind of on a daily or weekly basis in the organization, and just kickstart those relationships right off the bat, which I thought was a really great way of doing things.
Yeah, and for those kinds of teams, and I come from that kind of a team, actually your customers are other development teams as well. So having that customer focus also applies for understanding what they need. Definitely. Arthur, when we were preparing for this, you mentioned some work that you did for a UK news organisation linking web performance directly to time spent by users online. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So that relates to what I've said earlier between the in terms of starting with the equation and then the KPIs and then the tooling, and how it's not just about technology, So, well, that's his example, about the web speed, web performance of a media website and the impact on the business. And, well, there's a lot of figures I'd like to share, like if you improve the, well, maybe back to the e-commerce example, if you improve the, by 100 milliseconds, the load time on Walmart, that's a study that was done a long time ago, they had calculated that this would improve the revenue by 1%. It's an old one, but well, still interesting to push this kind of figure, including to a media for the examples that we've been discussing just before. But I have in mind some other example of just starting to measure the load time experience. We were able to identify quickly some quick wins like the images, or well, I've mentioned the example about the A/B testing, or how everything is put together. And we've that was a US client at the time, Blue Apron, and we were able to improve by 30% the load time performance. So that's kind of huge. But really, the other aspect, and back to my point about having this, building a culture of web performance with the dev and the rest of the organization, what I see is not just about getting to this level. I mean, if tomorrow you see your CEO and you say, hey, we've improved the web experience and now the homepage is loading in 1.8 seconds. Okay, great. What does it mean to me? I mean, who cares about this? What does these figures mean if you don't get some perspective? So working with the dev, we're always trying not just to identify the proper KPIs, not just to identify values and set some targets in terms of improving the user experience, but also we were coaching them to give some perspective. How does your website perform in this country compared to your competitor, or compared to Netflix? Before maybe going to your website, users will be on Netflix before. So is the experience adequate? Is it good or no? If you're, for example, in Korea, the expectations that you have when you're connecting from a super good bandwidth on 5G, it's not going to be the same than if you're in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, no? With very full connectivity. So it's measuring, it's comparing, it's giving some context. And this how you use you improve the user experience, because you don't have just one user. You have plenty of users, and they are everywhere around the world.
Yeah. So at the FT a while ago, when they were rebuilding the website, they wanted to make an argument for like prioritizing performance, and they ran a test where they deliberately slowed down the homepage loading for some customers so that they could say this is the impact it has on people stopping reading it. Once you've done that, you've kind of proved to the non-technical people that there is a value of investing in the performance. So I think that kind of those numbers, which brings me on to another general question that I'd like to ask whoever would like to answer it, which is really about how you do measure the outcome of the work that you do as a DevOps team. The kind of, if you're doing objectives and key results, how do you set ones that link the work that you do in DevOps with user experience? Anyone want to?
I can kind of
go.
I can go really quick on this one. I mean, something that we do for our, just having a centralized SRE team, our team only pages on customer facing KPIs. So can customers stream? If that is a no, in some way, shape, or form, we get paged, and then, can customers sign up? And so I think having those alerts tied literally to that customer experience can be super, super helpful.
If you're on the sort of team that has more, internal customers, if you're supporting other development teams, I think one thing that you can do is kind of measure the impact in time saved versus time wasted, where if you have a process that used to be, a really tedious manual process that took, an hour to do each time, and it involved a lot of, typing things and clicking things by hand. Nobody likes clicking things. If you can automate that and then say like, hey, this is now a 30-second process. We've just saved, however many minutes of developer time, do some math and be like, this is now how much time the developers can now spend directly supporting the customers. So you can kind of set some sort of, numeric value that the business types can appreciate that way.
And just to add to that, I think it's we all obviously, especially most of us seem to be in like DevOps SRE space. Sometimes the work is thankless, right? I mean, it's so how do you make your point? How do you get the recognition that you deserve? And again, it's always going to be hard. Like there's going to be near misses. There's going to be something that you've done, and then it's like you've prevented. So in my opinion, at least start with communicating that broadly, right? Without sort of coming across as you're trying to be boastful or something. But yeah, start communicating, and maybe hopefully your tooling makes it easier for tracking this. You should be careful about creating vanity metrics here, right? But if it's something, for example, in something that I'm trying to do is there's like an ROI element or an aspect of it where you're using all these systems, observability, like whatever, to actually fix incidents. Like, but let's say I'm spending $100,000 or something, but how much are you getting back, right? How many times did you actually use something like Splunk? Like Splunk was a superstar at Yahoo. Especially like when it came out, 2014 or something, people just loved it so much, and so there's the ROI aspect as well, where you want to know, like, I'm spending on something that and you want to see what the returns are.
I want to just remind everyone that's watching that you can ask questions via the Zoom Q&A for the group to answer live, but I'm going to follow up on what you're just saying, Kishore, because Molly, you mentioned when we were preparing for this that it's really hard to measure the outcome of where you stopped something from happening. So where you've invested that where you've done the work. So do you have some ideas of how you demonstrate that outcome?
You really read my mind, because I was already like teed up, ready to go. So yeah, it's obviously really hard, because when you do all this work to be reliable, then nothing happens, and that's the goal, is that you don't want anything to happen. One way that that we have kind of looked at how successful have we been in terms of kind of resiliency and reliability is looking at how our resiliency mitigation tools have helped us. So for example, at Netflix, we have the ability to move traffic out of a region if it has problems. And so sometimes we'll look at how many times did we do that in this past quarter? And it saved us from a hour-long outage, and instead our outage was 5 minutes because we bailed and then we had time to figure out the problem. So I think measuring things like how often you're using those tools to prevent larger incidents is a big win. Also, one thing our team does is we love to call out, and we'll highlight these in incident tickets and incident reviews. We call them like incident highlights or incident wins. And so basically, anytime we had an incident and maybe the alert caught the incident within a minute, we're going to call that out. Maybe the team had some super slick rollback, and so the incident only impacted us for a couple of minutes. So we like to call those out, and we send out this weekly newsletter to basically anyone who wants it. There's hundreds of people on the list, and it basically just goes through and it gives a brief summary of every incident that happened that week that was customer facing. And so that's one area where we'll call out those wins to promote other teams to also kind of follow those good practices.
I love that idea, and I'm completely stealing it. I think to just say, here's where this thing was excellent. That's great. Has anyone else got some good tips in this area?
Yeah, one I'd like to share in web performance. Well, once you have corrected the big ones, and it's getting harder and harder to win some more milliseconds. So how to keep the different teams engaged with the web performance work? Because well, once you have done you've got your golden nuggets corrected, somehow it's getting harder and harder. So one thing I've seen and has been very efficient, it was to establish some kind of competition between the different brands. So that was something we have seen in a luxury group with many different maisons, as we say in French, in the luxury industry. And the point was to share visibility on the web performance of every maison, every brand. So on a weekly basis, management will see, well, most of them will be green. I mean, because there are some super good SREs, nothing happens, but still they were competing to be the best one among the different brands. So this kind of competition was maintaining like a challenge, and will keep everybody enthusiastic about working on this.
Yeah, that sounds great. We've got one question that's come in, and we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to see if we can answer this, which is Andreas is saying, how do you motivate the team and keep the focus on deliverables? Does anyone have some good tips there to motivate your teams and keep their focus on deliverables? Molly? Sorry.
I was going to say, I think finding ways to kind of share the wins, like Molly was saying with the incident wins, just especially because, like some of us have said, infrastructure work can be really thankless, where nobody notices you if you're doing the job well. It's only when stuff goes wrong that people actually pay attention. Finding ways to share those sorts of wins internally. I've seen stuff like, a team internal like demo day where everyone gets to show off the cool little, DevOps things that they're working on, because other infra people and sometimes, developers on other teams will care, because, we can see, what is the value of this cool new workflow, or, this cool new observability tool, and just finding ways to surface that, even if it's at a smaller scope than, some big, company-wide, all hands, cool new feature announcement.
Just real quick, one of the ways is, again, we talked a lot about customer experience and empathy. We should have your leadership team be on call. And for like a day or two, right? It doesn't matter what your title is, and let them experience how hard it is to do the SRE job. Or it's really hard. Super hard. If you've ever been on call, you know what it feels like. So that's again, just you don't go back and ask your VP to be on call, but it is something to consider. I mean, those are the best people who can at least periodically experience what.
Just go
And you can
add
do it in
all
a shadow way too. I was just gonna say really quick, you do it in a shadow way. So you can have two people on call. And so when the SRE gets the page, someone else gets the page.
Or you can just add the entire C-suite as the very last tier of escalation policies in PagerDuty.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it's back to empathy, because that whole thing of if you can build empathy. So we want our DevOps teams to have empathy with their customers, but if you can have your leadership have empathy with your teams, they're going to understand what it takes to do it. So I think we're nearly out of time, but it's been so interesting. Thank you, everybody. That's been a really fantastic discussion. And we will all be heading over to the LeadDev Slack, to the Effective Teams channel. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask them there. Thanks for joining, and we hope to see you next time.